Trivium method of learning.
Welcome, friends, to episode 6 of the Wiki World Order Report, Critical Thinking to Interpret SPINformation. I'm your host, Morgan Lesko. All information is delivered with some amount of spin. Some spin is minimal and relatively neutral, while other spin dramatically changes the meaning or significance of information, and is also known as lying. Whether the spin is consciously or unconsciously applied, it must be consciously factored into your interpretation of any source of information. Information is distinct and separate from knowledge. And all of us are in desperate need of a reliable method to scan for viruses as we process everything. The idealized version of history that I learned as a child taught me that the media was supposed to provide public oversight on what happens in our government, a concept commonly known as the fourth estate. But just as regulators in the executive branch have been neutralized by industries with overly lubricated revolving doors, the mainstream media has been bought and paid for by the corporate industrial complex. In fact, just 6 mega corporations absolutely dominate all the news and entertainment in the country: CBS, Time Warner with CNN, Walt Disney with ABC, General Electric with NBC, Viacom with MTV and Comedy Central, and of course, Rupert Murdoch's News Corp with Fox. Please consider that the colossal mainstream media quite literally has blood on its hands. They failed in their critical role and oversight during the marketing of multiple completely illegitimate wars, like in Iraq. Chances are they never showed you the third building that collapsed at nearly free-fall speed on September 11th, World Trade Center Building 7. And they failed to report on how George W. Bush literally stole the presidential election from Al Gore in 2000. There are plenty of excellent presentations of this kind of information, which I recommend you check out if you are interested in these topics. The first on my list is Noam Chomsky, Manufacturing Consent, free and full on Google Video. Here's a clip where Chomsky is discussing the atrocities in East Timor.
I mean, this is way beyond just demonstrating the subservience of the media to power. I mean, they have real complicity in genocide in this case. The reason that the atrocities can go on is because nobody knows about them. If anyone knew about them, there'd be protests and pressure to stop them. So therefore, by suppressing the facts, the media are making a major contribution to some of probably the worst act of genocide since the Holocaust.
You say that what the media...
There is nothing more remote from what I'm discussing, or what we have been discussing, than a conspiracy theory. If I give an analysis of, say, the economic system, and I point out that General Motors tries to maximize profit and market share, that's not a conspiracy theory. That's an institutional analysis. It has nothing to do with conspiracies. And that's precisely the sense in which we're talking about the media. The phrase conspiracy theory is one of those that's constantly brought up, and I think its effect simply is to discourage institutional analysis.
I also strongly recommend checking out a recently released documentary named Psywar by Scott Noble, free and full on Google, spelled P-S-Y-W-A-R.
You see a news show, you watch 60 Minutes or a Fox program or whatever it is, you tend to give more credibility to what you're told is journalism. If an advertisement comes on, hopefully you tend to be more skeptical of that, because obviously somebody put an awful lot of money into crafting this slick TV ad and airing it. But what you probably never suspect is that that news story you just watched was also crafted by a company given to the TV station or network with the understanding that they would put their own logos on it, identify it as real journalism, and air it.
Colonel Sam Gardner would eventually chart 50 false news stories created and leaked by the Bush White House propaganda apparatus prior to and during the assault on Iraq. Foremost amongst these were the lies that led to the war in the first place. It was not bad intelligence that led to the invasion, concludes Gardner. It was an orchestrated effort that began before the war and was meticulously planned to manipulate the public.
Finally, one of my favorite documentary films on the issue of corporate media is titled Orwell Rolls in His Grave. Free and full on Google Video. Here's a clip with Bernie Sanders.
People don't appreciate this. You know, in the last days of the Soviet Union, you had dozens of newspapers, dozens of magazines, all kinds of radio and television stations. The only problem is that all of that media was controlled by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union or the government of the Soviet Union. We are moving in that direction. Fewer and fewer people vote. When polls tell us that fewer and fewer people understand the political process, what the media does is trivialize what goes on, sensationalizes it, makes it entertainment, rather than saying, look, the function of the media is to educate you to live in a democracy, which is pretty serious stuff.
Over the past century, we have become particularly accustomed to taking the word of authority figures, while downplaying the need for critical thinking. We've been taught to outsource all of our critical thinking to experts. Just as with society's rampant materialism, we've been encouraged to consume information instead of becoming active participants. As we evolve the processing of information via the widespread access to the internet, we are learning new ways to aggregate and hopefully distill the long tail of information. And the technologies needed And the technologies are indeed empowering many more people, like myself, to supplement their consumption with creation. But now that we have built the printing press of our century, we can maximize the power of this technology by reviving critical thinking to take a more methodical approach to interpret the newly found wealth of information. The goals are to reconcile all contradictions of information, constantly striving to increase our certainty regarding the who, what, where, why, and when of current and historical events. Critical thinking is indeed critical. Since the American public education system has failed to give us the skills required to actively question the media and other authority figures, we must also get back to our autodidactic roots. That means reigniting the joy of teaching ourselves whatever topics interest us. We must come to terms with how much we really don't know and unlearn or grow skepticism for much of what we've been taught by others. There are some remarkable educational concepts discouraged by our systems called the 7 liberal arts and sciences, made up of the Trivium and the quadrivium. In its simplest form, the Trivium is described as grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Grammar answers the question of the who, what, where, and when of a subject. Logic answers the why of a subject. Rhetoric provides the how of a subject. Once a student is conversant with this threefold procedural pattern, he is now capable of teaching himself, with minimal guidance from an instructor or facilitator, how to learn any established subject. I beg of you to go to peacerevolution.org and check out the amazing new podcast and documentation by Tragedy and Hope, which goes much deeper. Here's a clip from the second episode of the Peace Revolution podcast, The $1 Million Education, a rediscovery of the lost tools of learning.
Especially when you're living in the information age, you're inundated with information, and yet if you don't have a system, an operating system of taking in that information and thinking critically about it, deciding for yourself, then you're really left to all of the authorities. And there are plenty of authorities out there that want to tell you how to live your life and what to do with your money, etc.
I would say pointing out the fallacy arguments in someone's position, especially an authority figure, allows you to intellectually as opposed to emotionally respond to what they're saying in a way that's not necessarily threatening. It's just truthful, and throws the ball back in their court in a way where they have to, either admit they're using a fallacy or change their position. Whereas they want you to respond emotionally like a child, to get upset at the fact that they're saying something to you or ordering you to do something.
Right, and so you have to ask yourself, am I making this decision based on good reasons and on good evidence and logic, etc., or am I being overwhelmed by some vivid evidence or circumstance, by someone else's advanced rhetoric?
Well, I thought it'd be useful if I posted the logical fallacies, at least a list of them, in the form of PDF.
Clearly, this was written prior to 2000.
But the summary is that outcome-based education is in the benefit of these corporations and not in the benefit of our friends, families, and ourselves to be learning like that. Rick, what kind of example could you give for the audience of the Trivium method of learning versus the outcome-based education or the Prussian model of education?
Well, let's say someone could teach you a song or an instrument, using outcome-based education. You could be shown where to put your fingers, and mechanically how to get through the song by using small portions and then keep working, one portion at a time until the song is learned. You can learn this song faster than if you use the Trivium method. The Trivium method is the opposite of outcome-based education. So what if you wanted to learn another song? Under outcome-based education, you would need to be taught, dependent on someone to teach and guide you through the process of learning another song. Outcome-based education creates intellectual cripples dependent on a system already in place to educate individuals on every new subject or teach new songs, per the example, because the person learning never mastered the basics, but only the outcome, and you have no way to be creative. So, and then if you were to teach the same song using the Trivium method, first you would learn how to read music, which would be the knowledge or grammar portion of the Trivium. Second, you would learn how to use your fingers and scales, timing, etc., and this would be the understanding or logic portion. And then third, you would learn proper technique and expression, which would be the wisdom or rhetoric portion.
Right, so it sounds like outcome-based education keeps you coming back for more as a customer of a teacher, instead of that teacher teaching you the one lesson that allows you to learn any other subject on your own much more expeditiously than you can with a teacher in the traditional, what we know as the traditional system of education.
Well, and the tools of self-teaching enable you to move forward beyond the limits of your teachers and to become creative on your own.
Also allows you to save a lot of money, because if you think about it, if you learn how to read to yourself and you just get the curriculum, you can save a lot of money on a college education and go a lot farther and deeper and get a truer education and have these things as a level of understanding because of the method in which you stored this information and learned this information and learned to articulate this information to others.
In striving to use the Trivium method while evaluating the media, I have consumed many books and an immense amount of random, quote, documentary films on all topics with an open and critical mind, though I've never been a big reader of random writings or blogs on conspiracies. I look at more from creators who produce quality work and who clearly strive to offer maximum documentation and earn a record of higher historical accuracy. As far as consistent news outlets go, now I really like the Corbett Report and Media Monarchy. Just as I am striving to do, they provide more direct documentation to mainstream sources, the same sources on which the mainstream bases their realities. Since we are working uphill against public opinion on a lot of these issues, they've learned to stick to topics with a very strong documented case, and must hone their source and evidence validation to stay ahead of their powerful and endless critics.